to Requiem Metal Podcast, episode 17, Choosing Death.
Welcome to the Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Hundy.
I'm Mark Rudolph.
And joining us again for another wonderful opportunity, Chris Dick is here.
Yes.
And we're going to be talking again with Albert about his book, Choosing Death, which I think you wrote, correct?
I can't confirm that, but
I can neither confirm nor deny.
Speculation insists that I may have written parts of it.
Yeah, and rumor has it it's about metal.
It is. It's about some metal. It's about some death metal. It's about some grindcore.
Cool. Yeah, we heard, because we do this metal podcast thing, maybe you've heard about, and so we were told to talk to you and get in touch with you.
I've heard good things about it.
Yeah. But no, actually, we're going to talk to him just sort of about his experiences, kind of getting. We already heard in a previous podcast about some of your early, gateway experiences getting into metal and some of that stuff. But maybe a connector in terms of where you went from being a fan in the early '90s to all of a sudden, publishing a book. Like what got you to the point where you're like, gosh, I got to document all this and write a book and fly around the world and talk to people and.
I don't remember it ever being like kind of a conscious decision in that sense where, the thought of getting into, and I bristle even saying this, rock journalism would kind of get to the point where there would be, publishing books and magazines and things like that. For me, it kind of started where, as we talked about earlier, just a fan of this stuff in the early 90s. And just got as the early 90s kind of turned into the mid-90s, got really even further, deeper into the underground and really, in a head up your ass kind of way, honestly, where it was oh, I don't want the domestic version of this CD, I will pay the extra $10 to have this logo on the back of it, it's just stuff that I'm sure none of you can relate to.
No idea.
None whatsoever.
Looking at eBay today?
We were perusing eBay earlier and looking at Gourmet.
I had 4 copies of Battles in the North.
So I was that guy too. And still am, but it was just this kind of thing. I was working at a local record store in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, which is where I'm from, which is part of Northeast PA. Mm-hmm. It's not much going on there. This was kind of like a mid-sized record chain called the Gallery Sound. It was fine, but they had this monthly magazine newspaper thing called the Gallery of Sound Gazette. And they were a general audience publication, and so they would cover stuff that was across the board. They'd cover pop, rock, indie rock, alternative, hip hop, and they had in the back of the bus, of course, where it belongs, is a metal section.
Yeah.
And there was basically this one guy whose name was Michael Draper, and he wrote these reviews. He would cover bands. He would write about Cathedral and Carcass and My Dying Bride and Dio and just across the board stuff. But he was a very enthusiastic writer who you could tell he liked metal, but he he had this style about him where he was a very gimmicky writer. So he would do these things he would take a Cathedral review, and he would write the review as a conversation between Satan and a guy from Scranton. And it was the kind of thing it would maybe work once, but the guy would write 5 reviews a month, and 3 of them would be like that.
Kind of a Gene Shalit kind of
right.
Yeah.
So I was just it was the kind of thing where I was this guy who was uber underground elitist, really, and I was just
That's okay.
I was just It's like, what's happening here? Why is this guy doing this? This is horrible. This is happening. This is great music that people need to know about. You know, blah.
Well, he's kind of
blah,
mocking it almost, maybe, or
yeah,
trying to,
yeah, but he probably wasn't even, but I felt like he was at the time at least, and so. You know, I complained to the owner of the chain. I was just like, this is a total bummer. I was like, I know about this stuff. I could write about it. And he's like, all right, well, why don't you write some reviews and I'll give them to the guy who publishes it and we'll see what happens. So I wrote 2 reviews, literally just on legal paper. It was this Cannibal Corpse, Vile, and Dissection, Storm of the Light's Bane, and I wrote reviews of both, and a couple days later, the guy who ran this publication came into the warehouse and he was like, "Hey, I really like these. Can you do some more?" I said, "Okay." And the guy was Alex Mulcahy, who you guys met a couple hours ago, who I've worked with now for 11 years. But that was 12 years ago that happened. It was actually July of 96. And, I was still working at this warehouse. I was going to school full time, and, began writing these record reviews on the side. I was going to school I had no idea what I was doing. I was going to school for human resource management. And,
pretty much what you do now.
Right, yeah. In some ways I do. It's totally true. But, I was doing this and I was just kind of I was 21 years old, feeling my way around things. And, I don't know, I vividly remember having this phone conversation with Alex where he was like, so are you really interested in managing humans and their resources? And I was like, when you kind of lay it out like that, no, I don't really care about humans or their resources, or managing them in any way. And it was at that moment, it was I'm really enjoying this writing. I'm really enjoying, writing about metal specifically and music, and I was like, maybe I'll become an English major. That sounds like another lucrative career choice. And, I told my parents, they're like, great idea. Switch to an English major. And,
more money.
Yeah, it'll be loaded. So I did that, and I guess it was about 4 months after that, Alex was like, I'm running the magazine. The magazine was growing. He was getting more other chains he was publishing magazines for too, so he was getting a little busy. He's like, why don't you come in and do some stuff? Mm-hmm. And then I guess I got a job because I never left. And so, I became an editor of these general audience publications, and of course I'd write all the metal reviews and kind of edit that section, but edit the whole magazine, kind of put it together cohesively. Yeah. And so that was April or March of 1997, and so I was covering metal for in addition to other stuff. I actually got to do interview people who most people would think would be kind of cool, I guess. I've interviewed Radiohead and I don't know, Green Day, Moby, just things like that. The White Stripes.
Sure.
Bands that people who are listening to this could care less about. But bands that if you met somebody at a bar or something and you told whoa, really? What's Tom York like? And you're like, oh, he's got one weird eye. Anyway, so
you heard it here first.
So I was covering metal, writing about bands, seeing the scene evolve, and just doing my thing. And in 2000, Earache released this box set. I don't know if you remember it, this immortalized box set. Mm-hmm. And it was it's in a paint can.
Time capsule kind of.
Yeah, for the year 2000. Year 2000.
Yeah. Cue Conan O'Brien.
So I decided I'll do an interview with Digby for about this box set because it's like I could talk about earache records. It'd be cool, So I interviewed Digby, and I did like this 1,000-word piece that was basically like kind of like the history of earache records and the ups and the downs, and like in 2000 how metal was starting to come back a little bit, and they were getting their feet again, with their Wicked World imprint and blah blah blah. So Alex, he was still the publisher and obviously did a lot of editing too. We worked really closely on it. He's like, there's a skeletal outline of a book in here about this stuff. And I was like, yeah, that's great. I'll like that. I was like, that sounds like fun for somebody who isn't me someday to do that. But like, it's like I believe him. I was like, there is. It's the year 2000 and nobody's written a book about death metal and grindcore, and Lords of Chaos was out.
Yeah.
And granted, that isn't a history, but it's a book.
It drew enough.
Yeah. It's a big book about black metal, and there were a few other good music history books. American Hardcore wasn't out yet, but anyway, so I kind of like put it off out of sheer laziness or fear until it was really January of 2002 where I was like, okay, nobody's done this yet. This book still doesn't exist. It was like the kind of thing, well, I know I've got this idea in my head. I'll give it a year or so, and if somebody else will do it. And then when nobody else did it, it was like, damn it, I have to do this.
Gotta do it, yeah.
So I just set out that I do it and just started kind of outlining who I should talk to, and began process of tracking people down and getting contact information, going from A to B, and it definitely led to really interesting things when it got rolling. Like, I get like Jeff Walker's home phone number
from Carcass.
Yeah, from like Martin Nesbitt, their old manager, and I'd be like, "What do I do?" I'd be talking to him. He's like, "Just call." And I'd be like, "There's Jeff Walker from Carcass," and he's like, "Yeah, just call him." So I I'd call, and I'd left like a voice or a message on his answering machine, and he like emailed me. I left my email on the message too, just to because I didn't expect him to call me back. And like he emailed me like later that day, and he was like, sorry I didn't get the phone. I was hoovering. And I'm like, oh my God, Jeff Walker runs a vacuum.
Jeff Walker goes to the bathroom.
Right.
Yeah.
And so. It became like that started to happen, and then all of a sudden, these people who were just, iconic growing up, like, whether it was like Jeff or Mick Harris or, even Barney Greenway or Nick A. Anderson, or these people who were just like parts of these bands that you love so much, and all of a sudden it was like, it was different because like I said, I interviewed, the Radioheads and Ian Mackay's and like.
But you're not worshiping at the altar like.
No, but I love those. I love those bands. But like, there was something different.
They're not all over MTV. They're not rock stars. But there's still like a mystical quality.
That's the thing.
To them.
There was definitely a mystical element, and this was, the long process that still goes on of demystifying them, and for better or for worse, really. So. Anyway, so that started to happen, and I started to piece it together, and basically I did. I had like a book where I wrote down everybody who I thought I should try to contact, and all these names, and it was probably like 40 names.
Yeah.
When I started, and then it was like 60 names, and it was like 80 names, and it was 100 names. And then it was like, oh my God, like I was like, I'm not even going to think about writing this. I'm just going to do interviews. I'm just going to contact people. I'm going to do interviews. I'm going to write transcriptions. And I literally did that for a year without writing a word of the book. It was just,
you just did
get
interviews?
The pieces.
Yeah.
It was like, get the story. Because the story is going to come directly from these people. And the story is either going to be their quotes or, reshaping their quotes into prose and like putting it all together. So I need to get the story from them so I know it's right. So I didn't do any interviews at all. I mean, I didn't do any writing on the
transcription.
book.
Yeah.
It was only transcriptions. It was such a, I'd work all day, I'd come home, I'd do an interview, and I would do a couple hours of transcription every night for like a year.
Wow.
And let me tell you, it's a small miracle that I've had the same relationship I've had with my girlfriend this whole time.
Yeah.
It got a little strained for a couple of years, I will say that.
She's very patient.
Yeah. She gets an extra special thanks in the book. But yeah, I mean that was kind of the beginnings of it, the process. And I didn't have a publisher. There was no guarantee. I didn't know who was going to put it out. I was just like, I just have to do this, and then we'll figure it out. And Alex, the publisher, Decibel, and Decibel didn't exist then, who published those other magazines I talked about. He was always like, look, if you can't find anybody to put it out, we'll figure out a way to just get it out there into the world.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a cool safety net where you thought like, all right, even if I go to some publishers and nobody cares about this book, my friend and I will find a way to get this thing out. It probably wasn't. I didn't even really begin searching for a publisher until probably 60% of the book was written. And I bought this book called. I literally bought a book called "Getting Your Book Published for Dummies" that I found at like Barnes and Noble or something, and and this was like I'd done all these interviews and I'd written all this stuff already, and as I was reading, it's like apparently everything I'm doing is incorrect. You're supposed to write one chapter and then do this and send out these kind of samples to these kinds of people and stuff like that. But I guess I did get something out of the book, but most of these things were either about fiction, pitching fiction books, or pitching non-death metal art history books.
I mean, to a degree, all the interviews kind of shaped the direction and the narrative kind of flow of the book as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I was going to ask
more of that done before you could just okay, here's my sample chapter.
Exactly.
Because it's I knew as much as we all knew going into it, but I found out I didn't know anything. By the time you're doing all these interviews, and it's really, this is how this happened, and I'd get off the phone and it was every interview was a revelation. It was really? Those guys were responsible for this? Or I don't think it could have been done any other way, really.
Well, I was going to ask you about kind of how did you decide on the focus or the thesis of the book? Did you allow it to sort of find its own focus, or because you look at you mentioned Lords of Chaos, which has been accused of at times being a little on the sensationalistic side, and I mean you could have made that appeal to talk about violence and death metal and really sort of try to sell the book before it was sold. How did you decide to take the direction you did? Was it because you didn't want to burn bridges because you were such a big fan, or I guess I just had a vision in my head that it was going to be an historical document.
You pretty much took any of your own.
Because you took a lot of yourself out of it in some ways.
It was just chronicling.
Yeah, because you have to have it's difficult because you have to remain impartial, but you need to have some kind of voice that shows you're truly enthusiastic about this stuff. So you don't want to. Choosing Death is a little dry, and I'm fine with that because I think that the characters in the book are really interesting. I think I think reading a Trey Zagthoth quote or a Mick Harris quote or a Jeff Locker quote, I think that's where the entertainment and kind of
Morbid Angel washing your car.
Right.
This still sticks with me. Stories. It sticks with me.
Yeah. I mean they're great stories, and it's you have to kind of find that balance and remove yourself and let the participants who were there, let them tell the stories, because I wasn't there. So I don't want to get it wrong, and that's one thing, and then they've got the better stories. How'd you decide on what era to pursue? I guess
when did you know the book kind of had to end? Like, how did you figure that out? I mean, obviously the origins are easy enough with Sabbath or whatever, Venom, and moving forward. But what did you say to yourself? Like, I can't go past this many pages, or
No, I didn't really have a page count in mind. I mean, there was some editing done to like kind of slim it down. I'd rather it be like too short than too long, and be like something just exhausting that people never get through. But as far as reaching an ending, it was just like, it was to the present at that time. It was like to like around 2003, 2004 when it was getting finished, and the things that had kind of happened in the music industry at large and the metal scene, and I wanted to talk about, like, I wanted to obviously talk about the origins and talk about like what an impact this made, but I also didn't want it to seem like it was existed in some kind of bubble. Like this was something
only in 91
or only to like the four people in this room. You know, like this was something that, like, because of death metal, you had something like Slipknot. You know what I mean? Like you had something that like created this multi-million selling brand or band or whatever. And
well,
like,
you legitimized the whole, I mean, like, just somebody that had no idea this genre even existed could go and read this book and kind of figure out where things led. It wasn't just this sensationalistic, 10-year span or something.
Oh, yeah, well,
gave it wings, in a way.
Yeah, well, I mean, the other thing too is it's honestly not that sensational of a story. It's more of an interesting story of the music business. There isn't the sex, there isn't the drugs, there isn't the murder, there isn't the arson, there isn't the suicide. I mean, these are like, the thing about death metal guys is they're average dudes, and I mean they'll have their
postal worker jobs.
Yeah, or they'll have, they're eclectic and they'll have their ticks, if you will, some of them. But like, you're not going to get. It wasn't hard to not like to try to avoid being sensationalistic. I mean, I guess you could have, like, there were things I did consciously avoid, like I didn't want to put like Glenn Benton on the cover of the book.
Yeah.
Even though the French edition, which is right under there, they put Glenn Benton on the cover.
Really?
Yeah. But like,
that wasn't your decision though.
No.
The publisher.
I mean, they just do whatever once you have like a foreign edition. It's kind of out of your hands. But I wanted it to just to exist as a great story, as like a great piece of history and of a musical movement. Like I didn't want it encumbered by any of that other stuff.
Sure. Now, what's been the response, not only from fans but like maybe from the participants? Were they all pretty? Did they feel like, oh, you treated us fairly? It was a pretty warm reception. Yeah. No, it was surprisingly positive. Of course, some people I'm friends with will, I definitely take some jabs and abuse for certain things that are in there, or how much of somebody is in there and how little, or how much I spent on some album or whatever. But I mean, the people were genuinely just like really appreciative, that somebody did take the time to document it, they felt it helped legitimize them. I remember talking to Carl Sanders about it, and he was just so excited that he's like, I can go to a big store in my, neighborhood, and there's a book that I'm in right there on the shelf. I mean, Carl, God bless him, he's a bit of an ego, but but it's that idea. I mean, I know that Walker was psyched that he's like one of the people on the cover. Yeah.
It's because it not that they weren't legitimate before. I mean, obviously it
makes
was.
A lot of those sacrifices and the crap years and the heartaches. I mean, death metal didn't make a lot of money. These guys aren't millionaires,
right.
But it again gives them validity.
Yeah, it was like somebody cared and somebody didn't want to forget about this. Yeah. And so they were really happy because nobody else did it. And I mean, the reaction's been really good from the just general public. I mean, it's sold really well, and I mean, I'm not just like musicians aren't getting rich off it, I'm not getting rich off it either. But it's been successful, and people seem to like it, and people still MySpace me like, oh, I just read your book. I'm like, really? Cool. Like, it's great.
Well, you got the best pull quote ever, the Richard Christie.
Is that amazing?
You couldn't have asked for better.
That happened in person. That really? Was when you introduced me to him, Chris. That was at Metal Fest. Yeah, that's when you walked me over to him, and he was all loaded. Bombed out? He was bombed when that quote was given, but I have a feeling he didn't make that up. But I'm really happy I got to do it, and it's still out there, and there's definitely presented me with some opportunities, and since it's been out, but obviously presented me with great opportunities to meet these people and establish, become friends with a few of them, and to have the opportunity to have get to work with John Peel was crazy. Wow. I mean, I was like so intimidated to get that together, and it really took actually a lot of work to get it together, and kind of like, because I had to work through his agent, who was just like really like giving me the super runaround. And then when I guess she eventually went to John and said, hey, look, this guy wants to do a book and wants to interview you, and it like once she actually finally asked him about it, he was like, just have him call me. And so I like called John Peel at home and like do this interview with him originally, because there's like some quotes from him in the book, and this is a great interview, and we had this great talk, and I was just really appreciative when I was going to have the phone with him. And he's like, look, if you need anything else for this, just call me. It's like, you have my number, just call me. And I was like, okay, awesome, So then
you got the forward from him.
So then like 6 months later, I was like, it'd be pretty amazing if I get him to write the foreword for this. So I call, I'm just like trying to psych myself up to call him to like to do this. So I do it. I call him, and I have this huge like wind up, like about like how I think it would just be like the most amazing thing in the world, and like how like just it's like, I don't expect you to say yes, and all this stuff. And he was like, yeah, no problem. It's like, I'm totally into it. I'll do it. And I was just like, really? And he's like, yeah, sure. He's like, I think it'll be great. Just tell me when you need it and how many words, and we'll do it. And and then the next part began harassing him to actually do it, because I was like coming up on a deadline and he was late, so I'd have to call him. So I'd have to call John Peel and annoy John Peel.
I was going to say, and you feel bad, like bugging John Peel. Like, I'm really sorry to trouble Mr. Peel, but I kind of need this. It was amazing, because like he lived with his wife Sheila on this farm, and I would call, and I'd be like, John, I need you forward, dude. He's like, this is the weekend, and then like another weekend would go by, and I would call. And it got to the point where Sheila, his wife, recognized my voice. It was like the nice American boy who was calling. And she knew that I was trying to get the book forward out of him. So like there was like times I would call, and she was like, has he not finished that book forward for you yet? And I was like, no, just calling to try to get him to do it. She's like, I'm going to make sure he does that. And I was like, okay, awesome, and eventually, he did it, and he faxed it over, and I still have the fax in my office in there, which there's a cover letter to it, which is amazing, which I can't really mention on the G-rated podcast. Oh yeah,
but
it's PG rated.
It's PG. It's Red Dawn. It's PG-13.
Wolverines.
But so he sent it, and it was great, and I was like, look. I know we hadn't talked about this, but I want to give you some kind of compensation for this. I was like, I want to definitely, because you took time to do this, and it's really good and everything. And he was like, no, he's like, don't give me anything. It's like, I don't want any money. It's cool. And I'm like, I got to do something. I was like, can I just like donate like a couple £100 in your name or something? He's like, it's no problem. Don't worry about it. And I was just like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? So I remember like a week later, I like called and asked to speak to Sheila, and I explained the whole thing to her. I'm like, look, he won't take any money or anything, and I feel really bad, so I was like, what does he like? Can I buy him a present? She's like, he loves red wine. I'm like, red wine, huh? And she's like, yeah. She's like, if you send him a bottle of red wine or something, he'll be psyched. And I was like, okay, cool. So the next task begins, like, figuring out where there's like a winery in, I can't remember the town that he lived in. I mean, I have the address somewhere still, but I can't remember the name of the town, but it was like a podunk, like, British village. And like I had to call a couple wineries, and I eventually found one. And I explained, like, I need these sent to John Peel. And they're like, yeah, you need these sent to John Peel. Great. And I was like, no, look, this is
You're like some psycho.
right.
Yeah.
And I explained the whole thing, and like eventually they were like, cool, and they sent him the wine. And and I'm guessing he got it. And then the book came out, or I got advance copies of the book, and I sent him one, and it was literally like a couple weeks later that he died. So I never spoke with him after he got it or anything. So, but he's just an amazing guy, and like I just like when I tell British people that story, it blows their minds because he is just like for what he meant to that country. Is
absolutely,
he's a national hero.
Yeah.
It's still crazy to me that he was such a proponent of grindcore.
Yeah.
I mean, just at that kind of level.
Yeah, and it wasn't like an irony thing.
No,
or like
no. I think you can honestly kind of see.
Probably saw the future.
This is.
This is a legitimate path that will exist. And I don't know, have a big role in a genre of music down the road.
Right.
Was he amongst the most unique people you met? I mean, who was maybe the most unique person, or like strangest, or just like totally different than what you thought they would be like, or is there any unique kind of?
Well, there's so many different personalities out there, and then the other thing is, you talk to people who are on different sides of the industry too. Like tracking down all those people who were at Columbia, where the Columbia earache thing was like a really interesting thing. Like one of the guys, the David Kahn guy, was he's like a super high-end producer who's produced tons of platinum records and like plays with like Paul McCartney and stuff, and like co-writes songs with Paul McCartney and stuff. And he was like one of the main A&R guys at Columbia at the time who like pushed that deal through to make that happen. So like just like talking to that guy and like getting their impressions about like things, and like those kinds of things were even like it's definitely cool, like talking to the early grindcore death metal progenitors and stuff, but like these people who had just like a really different perspective and were at such a different place with it. But there's so many compelling like characters. I mean, Digby's a compelling character, and Jim Welch, who ran the U.S. earache office, and Hammy at Peaceville, and obviously Mick Harris is like such a strong personality and such a driving force for how the scene and the style evolved. That like when I think of grindcore, I think of Mick Harris. And I mean, I know there's so many other pieces to it, but like just because he's such a dominating personality, and he's like, he burned a lot of bridges with a lot of people, but Mickey's always been awesome to me.
He's kind of got a Lars Ulrich kind of like just, he's almost like Lars Ulrich's like the driving personality, like thrash metal, almost,
right.
In a way.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that. Just
Yeah. Anything
better hair.
anything that you regret kind of taking or putting in, or you regret not being able to include in the book that you would have liked to, or?
I mean, there's some like elements and some things I wish I spent a little bit more time on. I honestly wish I spent a little more time on like, something like Holland, and like talking a bit more about like a band like Pestilence, and
every little niche, and
that's the band that you like.
Asphyx?
Yes, Asphyx.
Well, on the Dutch scene, the band that preceded all those bands was Thanatos.
Yes.
So I mean, that would be a band to really talk about, because they were the ones who inspired the Pestilences and the Asphyxes, and you cross the Shans.
Oh,
But
wow.
You got to know where to cut the fat too on a
days.
project and
Yeah.
keep it
It's-
focused.
yeah.
And it's a
That is-
concise read too.
that
I
is
read it in
the
2 days.
It's in-
That's for me. That's quick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought it was a great read. I mean,
Yeah, no, it was
Yeah.
excellent.
not to sort of
Not to glad handle you,
jump the
but-
thread jack, if you want to call it that. I thought it was a great read because, it kept your interest, and the way it was written, it was a page, it was a page turner. You could actually just, you knew some of these things happened at the time, but, you didn't see the connectivity between those things like Nile and Morbid Angel. You didn't understand how those two bands were related, really. And understanding how the scene sort of came together was really a cool thing to behold, in 200 plus pages, or whatever it was.
I'd say it's probably made, at least I know for Mark and I go back and buy so much old stuff that we either had and sold or just skipped over at
Oh,
the
yeah.
time. I mean, it's really made us go
Store
back and
collection
fill in a lot of
seed
gaps
drives
and
and
stuff like
everything
that.
else.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it did for me too. Even when I was putting some stuff together, there were some records I didn't have at that time.
Or maybe appreciate it because you didn't understand
Yeah.
what their role was or why you should even care about, certain records or something.
Right.
Until it's
Yeah.
put into context. So, what?
No. Albert knows what I said, probably.
Chris is up to something. And you're doing another, a book, but you're not actually writing the book from scratch this time. This Hall of Fame book.
Oh, thank God.
Just give us a little maybe background on this, just for people listening who might be curious to get more information about metal.
Okay. Well, Decibel we have a monthly feature called the Hall of Fame, which really seems to be the most popular feature of the magazine, where we take a classic record and interview everybody who played on that album, get them to basically talk about the writing and the recording process and the thought process and the aftermath and just of the record and everything that was going on around it. And they become, they're pretty definitive pieces surrounding a piece of music. We're going to compile 25 of them into a book and try to expand each one of them as best we can and pull out some things about them to make them a little more interesting to people who maybe have already read them. That's going to come out next year on DeCapo Press, which is this kind of literary press, really, in New York that does... I guess the thing that they're probably best known for is they have an anthology called Best Music Writing that comes out every year, which is like they compile the best just music journalism.
Okay.
And I'm proud to say we actually have a piece that's going to be in it this year.
Oh, cool. Which one?
It's Jay Bennett's piece on underground black metal versus commercial black metal.
Yeah, I just reread that actually the other day. It's cool.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I mean, there's other ones I maybe choose over it, but it's still really cool, and Bennett obviously deserves it. But we're gonna do this hopefully next year, and there's gonna be 25 of them, and my goal is to do 24 of them that have run previously in Decibel, and do one that's only going to run in this book. Kind of like the bonus track.
But you can't probably tell us what that is yet.
No, because I haven't figured it out. I was actually trying to get Neurosis to do one because they'd been shooting down doing Through Silver and Blood for years.
Yeah.
So I kind of went back to Scott Kelly, who I'm very friendly with, and I was like, look, dude, we're doing this, and I'd take Souls at Zero, I'd take Times of Grace, I just think it'd be awesome to do something like this, and he tried to rally them.
And they're not about it.
No go. So I got to figure out, there's a couple that I'm thinking, but I want it to be good, but I also want it to, it's weird, it's kind of a weird thing, because you don't want to put a crappy bonus track on there.
Yeah. You don't want it to be predictable either, though. I mean, you want a surprise, but... Injustice for All.
We're actually trying to do a Hall of Fame for Injustice for All right now. That would be the cover story of our December issue. Because our December issue comes out in November. November 08 will be the 20th anniversary of Injustice for All.
Wow.
And the issue that's out in November is going to be the 50th issue, if we keep going, of Decibel.
You better. I have a subscription.
Yeah, no, we don't want to break hearts or agreements, binding agreements. So, we're trying to get that done I don't know if it's going to happen.
And that would kind of coincide. I don't even know when the new Metallica record's coming out.
It's coming out in September.
Yeah, so I mean, it's all very timely. You know?
Yeah, and it'd be a good excuse to not have to talk about the new Metallica record.
It would be.
So.
Even though Rick
put it in context. Let's not talk about Metallica.
But,
at least not new Metallica.
But yeah, that's the plan for that book. It's going to be called Precious Metal, and it's there's a subtitle that I don't remember. I have it written down somewhere, but I'm sure it's really.
And those are all going to be expanded versions of the original.
That's the plan.
With including like photos and all that kind of stuff as well.
There's not going to be many photos. When talking with DeCapo, they want to keep it very text heavy, like a really anthology kind of thing. I mean, I had it in my head originally. I wanted it to be like a big coffee table book that would have like all kinds of stuff in it, but
color photos. Yeah.
But the production costs, I couldn't find any publisher that would agree to take it on, and I approached a few people. I never approached Feral House actually. Now that I think about it, but. Hopefully I'm not contractually obligated to release another book with them.
Probably should write that on your to-do list.
Yeah.
Double check on that one.
But yeah, that'll be out probably spring of 2009.
Awesome.
And there's Chris has 2 Hall of Fames that he's written that'll be in it. So.
Which one's the Opeth and Catatonia?
No. I believe Albert had told me that it would be the Cannibal Corpse, Tomb Mutilated, and Opeth.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I get one of them.
I'm 90% sure it's Opeth.
Okay.
Yeah. That's definitely Tomb Mutilated, though. Anyway.
Cool. Just to sort of wrap things up, just kind of pick your brain, since you do typically kind of play, some music on a lot of the podcasts and stuff, even though we had a special opportunity to talk to Albert today about something very related to our podcast. Kind of get into just a few of maybe your favorite death metal records coming out of the Choosing Death book, but I'll start first with you've always mentioned that in your opinion, like the essential sort of death metal record is Necroticism from Carcass.
Yes.
And I not that I disagree with you, I'm just kind of curious, as to what makes it that record for you and for the sort of the metal world.
I see a blog post on this here. Write this down. one of my daily requirements satisfied.
For me, again, it's something that we talked about earlier in this podcast, maybe even the At the Gates podcast. It's that kind of moment in time for you when you're kind of exposed to something. And that's a record that's like a 91, 92, people are hearing that. And it's really heavy, it's really fast, it's really melodic, it's really catchy. It's not one of any of it's not defined solely by any of those things. It's all of those things.
They freed themselves from grindcore at that point. They're whatever they want it to be.
And it's just like, I love Carcass for a lot of reasons. I think that, I think the humor in that band is often, I think even occasionally lost on them. But I think it's an element, their whole presentation, I love the cover. I love that I can't even really read the text in the CD booklet because it's like whoever laid it out. I think it may have been Martinez.
Isn't it green?
No, you're thinking of the old head shirts.
Oh yeah.
But they're heads in the booklet. But it's basically like whites on light grays and just like it's a total mess. But I don't know. For me, that record is just like definitive of a super exciting era.
I don't know. For me and Chris, when we got that CD, I don't know how many times we listened to it. Yeah, we just sat there. He had like a little boombox, and we sat in the foot of his bed, and just like, oh my god.
Yeah,
there are so many catchy riffs. Yeah. And again, it's just like I can't to try to isolate like one thing about that record that defines it. It's to me, it is that it has all of those elements, and they're all just like distributed equally throughout the whole thing. And I like.
Is there any particular pairings of songs or a couple songs that come to mind? Obviously, Corporal, Jigsore, Quandry is sort of the most well-known song on the record. But is there maybe a personal favorite from being that sort of younger, teenager, kind of grabbing a hold of that record?
Yeah, Pedigree Butchery and Incarnate Solid Abuse.
Yeah.
is so catchy. It's ridiculous how catchy those brutal death metal songs are, and I don't know. I mean, I'm just kind of, I know I'm just bouncing all over the place, just trying to think of things about it, but I mean, Jeff didn't sound like anybody else.
Yeah.
You know, and how low Bill got with the growls and
I mean, lyrically, they were like, you didn't really know what to think. There's all this like mysticism surrounding them, like, oh, there are these medical students that dropped out of school.
I remember that rumor.
This stuff.
Well,
And this was us being stupid teenagers and buying into this stuff as well. But
yeah, and they definitely wanted to perpetuate that idea. When really it was just, you know, Jeff's sister had a medical textbook.
Yeah. Just a mysticism to that band. I remember.
Yeah.
I had, you know, because I'm not a generation behind you guys, but, you know, 4 grades behind these guys. So I was in 8th grade when they graduated in high school, you know, kind of thing. So I got Heartwork when I was a freshman in high school or something, which then, I mean, that blew my head completely up, and then went back and got Necroticism. But those 2 records kind of as a pairing, you know, hold a very special. I mean, I go back to those records probably more than almost any old, you know, death metal record outside of maybe, you know, Altars of Madness and, you know, Left Hand Path and Clandestine, and, you know, some of that stuff. But
yeah, I mean, it's like I don't know how anybody could argue that isn't at the very least just the top 5 death metal album. You know what I mean?
oh, easily.
It should just be in everybody's. And but it's weird, you know. I know people who are like the biggest Carcass freaks in the world, and they are like, you know, it's like symphonies. It's all about symphonies, or it's all about Reek, and then they get to Necroticism. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you know, it's strange, and there's people who are just all about Heartwork.
Yeah. Just kind of 4 different era. I mean, each album was its own kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, just like At the Gates, they were their own.
yeah.
They were going through something.
From that early era, what are a couple other, would you say, essential death metal releases outside of Necroticism for you, or just as a journalist, or, you know, a connoisseur expert on death metal? You know, if somebody had to go get 5 records, Necroticism maybe being one of them.
Necroticism, The Cause of Death is another one.
Obituary, okay.
A Morbid Angel record, and I honestly think you could just pick one of the first 3, and like any one would be representative. Like if you
don't have a personal favorite, or is it just sort of?
My personal favorite is Covenant, but I'm often like in the minority with that.
I'm the same way.
Yeah.
I had a cassette tape in 8th grade. I remember we sat there and we looked at Tomb of the Mutilated and Covenant and had to decide which one we were going to buy. And one of my buddies bought Tomb of the Mutilated, and I bought Covenant. And I don't know. For me personally, I won out. So
yeah, you did.
Pretty happy with that decision.
I mean, I would say Left Hand Path, but I think it was probably like about 4 or 5 months ago. I had this like weird revelation, or I went through this period where I started to believe that like An Ever-Flowing Stream was a better record back to front than Left Hand Path.
You're actually not that far off.
Yeah. I think that's why we.
Anderson wrote most.
Yeah, right.
That's why I think Mark and I decided to do Dismember podcast before Entomb. There's something just more.
It's visceral.
Yeah. It's.
I mean, like, so you know, either one of I'd say like I know I'm definitely like getting off easy when I'm doing it like this, but I'd say either one of those 2.
Sure.
And you know, I mean, it verges more into grindcore, but like I'd say Repulsion Horrified. I mean, it's so hard to. I mean, if we're gonna just like stick like to just like death metal, then you know I could probably rule out Repulsion. I could probably rule out even At the Gates.
Yeah, you can. I mean, you can open up however you want to. You know, really. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I it's definitely like. I mean, Autopsy, Mental Funeral. I mean, it's just. I don't know. I can't do it.
Yeah. Tough. It is tough. It is tough. So.
Yeah.
But anyhow, we appreciate you. You know, straining here with 3 hours of sleep. We've kept you late at the office. You know,
where else do I have to be?
Yeah. Well, at least there's not a night game for the
Phillies.
Phillies.
The Phillies have already won this afternoon, so
pretty much everything's taken care of.
Yeah, no, the magazine's gone to print. We saw At the Gates. The Phillies have won. We got podcasts done. I don't really know what more somebody could ask.
It's been a good day. You know, we had Philly cheesesteaks. for the first time today traditional.
Yeah, it's
so
like Christmas today.
I mean, this is like we saw the Liberty Bell a couple days ago. I mean, this is hot damn. Freedom and fat. Going crazy.
It's getting late, and there's the Wawa outside. We can around 9 o'clock here in Chinatown. Things can get really interesting. We can show you a lot more of Philly. That isn't on any tourist brochures.
No. But
maybe in the back of Philly Weekly.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I gotcha. Well, anyways, we really appreciate you, being here with us, Albert, and recording a couple podcasts with us. And
thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, hey, anytime. And if you have any responses or disagreements with some of the death metal records that we sort of threw up there, you can email us at requiempodcast@gmail.com. And you can also find links to this podcast on the Decibel website, which is decibel.com? Decibelmagazine.com.
And the Decibelblog.com.
The Decibelblog.com.
Decibelblog.com, which Chris here is in charge of.
Nope, not in charge.
Oh, not in charge. Contributing.
I contribute to it.
It has no true leader, which is the beauty of it.
Right.
It's just, it's a rebel state.
Yeah,
it's kind of like that little weird zone between Canada and the U.S. There's actually no legal, there's no statehood, there's no nationality. If you go through that and you get arrested, you're literally in legal limbo.
Yeah.
And you go to,
like that.
Or you go to Guantanamo. One of the two. So.
You can't go to Guantanamo. There's no country has the right. And the reason why I know this is because when I was on tour with Amorphous, you can cut this out. When I was on tour with Opeth and Amorphous, we went through this little no man's land, and the guy said, "If you get arrested here, you stay here." It's like being arrested in the middle of the ocean.
It's like purgatory?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no nation owns this literally quarter mile of land.
Really?
It's technically it's lawless.
Well, who can arrest you? If it's lawless, who can?
Apparently, there's jurisdiction between the Canadian federal police and the U.S. federal police.
Mm-hmm. I smell the blog.
In either one of you,
I smell the blog on this one.
Either one of those countries have jurisdiction to either arrest you or release you, and you don't get put into the country in which you're arrested. You stay in that little.
So can can they work together to get you arrested or get you released?
I'm sure they could.
I think they should have a reality show where these people have to set up a real society on this strip of land. I think it'd be fascinating.
Better than Rock of Love 3.
Yeah. That's true.
Will he ever find love? Well,
will he ever
find out next week on the Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm Mark Rudolph.
I'm Jason Hundy.
I'm Chris Dick.
Albert Mudrian.
Sudden or unexpected death could be brought here for a post-mortem by a pathologist. Their job is to establish the cause of death. But sometimes a body is unrecognizable. Then it's vital, especially if murder is suspected, to establish identity.
Yes, to me, this is like
How do you like typing?
Was writing
Do you
a
find
lot of fun.
transcription frustrating?
What was your favorite transcription?
Oh my god, don't even get me started.
I know
That's
Mark's
the kind of
favorite
interview it should
transcription.
be. I don't, because my memory is about as...
The
Which one?
transcription of Carcass artwork.
The interview?
The interview.
It's the one I typed up at Kinko's.
Kinko's, and you were like literally on
didn't
the
save
last
it.
line, and the computer went.
Oh man.
And I typed like...
It was like we got there like 11 o'clock at night, and it was like 4 in the morning, and he finally goes, yeah, I'm kind of done. And then all of a sudden the computer dies out, and it was like, I lost it. And he didn't save it all. I'm like, oh, well.
That's before Word had developed the thing that would
Autosave.
save.
This is on
Autosave.
ClarisWorks, I
Oh.
think.
It was on ClassWorks, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Hey, I used ClarisWorks up until like 5 years ago, 6 years ago.